This is one of those cases where nerds unite, right? So we're all early adopters. We're looking at emerging technologies to try and understand how it can affect our scientific laboratories. In this new age of autonomous science and robots and AI models, right, data is king, right? How do we use emerging tech to both add to that data, but also give insight to the scientists as they're working? And so you'll see we've got a couple of headsets, we've got other little technology pieces that we'll talk about today. Right now it's blurry enough that I'm going to take it off. Anyway, Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Tom Brunner. I work with Russ. I'm part of the SmartLabs team, get around into a lot of the lab spaces here at PNNL and help the researchers get their data off of their systems, or all kinds of other things with robots, or other ways of enhancing the lab space so that we can ease the burden of IT, and especially, or other things for the researchers. So pretty much anything we can do to help augment what they're doing in the lab spaces. And we'll talk about several of those things today.
So Smart Labs came about 3 or 4 years ago. Really took hold during COVID, is when the first seed was. And the reason why COVID was sort of an early driver was we had to limit the number of staff that could go in a laboratory. If you remember back then, you could only have 2 or 3 people in a room. They had to be 6 feet apart, right? And we used to have as many scientists as you could inside a lab. So remote monitoring became a thing that you had to have happen during COVID. And so, research computing, okay. So that was an initiating driver, but has gone so much further than that now that we're hybrid, right? It's no longer about remote monitoring, it's about data collection. It's about creating models. It's about these emerging technologies and how you use them. So Tom already talked a little bit about this. This is about supporting entire scientific inquiry and accelerating research outcomes, unencumbering the researcher. I hadn't seen this deck yet, so I'm going to have to go on the fly. So some of the things that we're looking at is about that digital instrumentation. And so we've got a variety of sensors that we can put across the laboratory. We can pull data directly off an instrument itself and an instrument controller, regardless of the OS it's running on, right? We can actually bring all the data into one central location so that you can actually understand what's going on in your experiment.
So one of the things that we can help enable is there's a lot of legacy systems here at PNNL and across the nation, right? So how do you keep those legacy systems safe in an environment where they can't be on the internet? You know, Windows XP systems, Windows 7 systems that are still attached to instrumentation that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace, right? So we have a special system here that we have an isolated network that we keep those systems on, that they're able to get their data from those systems into the more modern environment and high performance computing, and use the data that is still being produced by those legacy systems in a safe manner, right? And so they can also remote into those systems so they can monitor, like with the sensors, or actually onto the instrument controller and see what the instrument is doing using that network.
Yeah, so he's talking about these legacy systems, and often the use case that we see is a scientist will come and they'll put a USB stick to get the data off the instrument controller, and then they take that USB stick and they stick it in their hard drive or in their laptop. That's vulnerability in terms of a cyber perspective, right? The reason why that system is offline is because it's no longer supported. And as soon as you go from here to here with a USB stick, you're potentially spreading a virus back into the network that's been isolated. So that's what this LabNet, this secondary network, and the ability to pull data off these legacy systems. So we are a resource here at the laboratory. We sit in CIT, but we're right above the tech desk layer, right? So you may call tech desk because your computer's failing. If you call tech desk because your instrument needs help, they're going to look at you like, I don't even know what this thing is, right? So we are one level above because we are acquainted with the mission space that's going on in the laboratory, but we also know a lot about those instruments and the instrument data that's coming off of it, and we can help beyond sort of just that normal call about your computer. And so we become a member of the team in that laboratory, right? We are always there. We are currently working with you and assessing what's going on in the laboratory so that we can make recommendations about how to improve, optimize, or increase the way science is done. These are some of those drivers I was talking about. One of the first ones is this pace of mission. We are seeing an increase in mission need like 2 times every year, right? Like in terms of speed, we need to this twice as fast, twice as fast, twice as fast. It used to be you would write a proposal and whatever time it needed, you would take and you would then push your results. Now what's happening are the sponsors are driving that pace faster and faster all the time, right? And part of it is just because the way the world is right now, the pace of technology, they have this expectation that science can be done that fast. And so we are trying to find ways to accelerate and optimize so that we can at least make it faster so that the sponsors understand what it is you're working on and you're able to work on it quicker. We're also seeing an increase in collaboration. Our sponsors here at the lab are not just coming to PNNL, they're also coming to other labs. They want us to collaborate with academia, right? And in order to do that, you need to find a way to share data. In order to do that, you need to find ways to work together when you're not all physically in the same space all the time, right? This remote monitoring, this ability to use Teams, this ability to be virtually in a space, even when you're not anywhere near each other. And then the hybrid work is the one I was talking about that was driven from COVID. And the fact is that we're not always on site. So we took a very human-centered approach. We did a bunch of interviews. We did some ethnography. We did some contextual inquiry. All these things mean is we went and we observed, right? So my background is in user experience and human factors. And so I went into laboratories and we just tried to understand what the pain points and the challenges are that our scientists are experiencing. Those became requirements, and those requirements paired with the business and technology, and that's how we started collecting some of the devices we'll talk about today. Want to talk about some existing capabilities?
This is kind of a dry list, right? So we've talked about LabNet. That's probably one of our core ones, and that's one of the means that we get into the lab space. The researchers looking for that kind of, how do I get my data off? How do I get access to it? That's usually our foot in the door to maybe talk to them and say, hey, we have some other features that we can talk to you about, other services that we can provide. And we'll probably go into the sensors a lot more, so I'll kind of cover that a little bit later. One of those is, we call it disaster recovery. You've probably heard of that in other ways, but what we do in lab spaces, again, talking about those legacy systems, right? The most common failure point of those legacy instrument controllers is going to be the hard drive, right? There's other ones. It could be motherboard or power supply on some of these older units, but commonly it's the hard drive. And so all of a sudden, if the hard drive fails, you have a instrument that can cost 300, 400, however much to replace, and it's inoperable because you no longer have a instrument controller that can make it function. So how we can fix that is we go in and we take the hard drive, and if nobody's seen it, this is actually a blown up mechanical hard drive, right? So there's platters on here that the data is stored on. These spin, there's grease, there's rust, there's all kinds of failure points. It will fail. It's not a if, it's a when. And so we go in and we take that drive out, we copy it, clone it to a solid state drive that's going to be longer functioning. And it's basically a clone of that existing one. We slap that back in, possibly make an extra one of it. And again, this isn't around the data, right? We're not making that data secure. We're making the operation of the instrument secure, right? So if that hard drive were to fail in 2-3 years, or somebody erases it or something happens, we would just pop in the other one and they're back up and functioning in 30 minutes. And the cost of that is, pretty marginal. A hard drive nowadays is about $100. So they're saving possibly that instrument that could cost, hundreds of thousands to replace. And it's just one quick operation with a hard drive. So that's one of our functions. Some of the other ones are going to be, we have some, are you going to talk about that, sir?
Well, I'll talk about that, yeah.
All right, so those are probably some of the two core ones, is the data operation with LabNet, the disaster recovery. And then again, we go in once we get that foot in the door and we talk to them and see what else we can do for them. Then Russ will go over some of these other things too.
Yeah. So one of the things we discovered early on is this emergence of robotics. And one of the first ones is this one, right? This is essentially an iPad on a stick. If you guys ever seen Big Bang Theory, right? That's essentially that same robot. We have 5 or 6 of these things. The goal of the robot is telepresence. And so you can dial into this thing and drive it on your computer or your phone. And then the screen goes up and down. So based on what you're looking at. And the idea here is remotely, you can drive into a lab and have conversations and collaborate, right? A CSM, Cognitive Space Manager, research supervisor can drive in and essentially supervise what's going on in that space with this robot. One of the best ones we had, a great use case, we had a scientist who was a cognitive space manager, and they had 2 labs that were side by side. And unfortunately, I think they had a skiing accident or something, but they were no longer able to do their CSM responsibilities because they couldn't physically navigate the laboratory. We gave him one of these robots, and he was able to still be a CSM, even though he had his leg up on a chair. Right? It's a really cool use case in terms of accessibility. These robots are evolving quick. Here's another example. This is called the Timmy. So the Timmy can be a telepresence robot, but really the purpose of the Timmy is to be a guide, right? So this has AI on board, language models that are trainable. It has a camera system as well, so it is very aware of what's around it. It will not run into you, will not drive over you. The other one could do the same thing. But it has the ability to drive autonomously. And so one could imagine having this in your laboratory, and you could have it as an assistant that it could roll to you and ask questions, right? How does this instrument work? I've got an error. What does this error mean? It would drive over, and it would then, just like you do when you're talking to your Echo, it would then respond. It can have a screen on here that actually shows a video of that instrument and how to fix it, right? We're currently using it as a guide in one of our buildings, ESC, which is over here, and you can basically say, what's going on in this laboratory? It could follow you. It's not on right now, is it? Okay. Normally when it's on the ground, it'll literally follow you like a dog, and then it talks to you as you walk. But you can ask it, where is this laboratory? And it will turn and it will drive you to that laboratory. Right? What's going on in this laboratory? And it'll show you what's going on in the laboratory and even play a video of the scientists talking about the work they're doing in the laboratory. Right? So it's great for that, but it's also thinking about how do we augment and provide an assistant in a laboratory without you having to plug into your computer all the time. So some of the impacts we talked about, accessibility, cybersecurity and cyber awareness, and we'll talk about the sensor platform and that kind of stuff here shortly. So Smart Labs, we have a workflow, right? It's not just about, ooh, cool tech and buy it, right? So it's about thinking about the use case, how it could be used, listening to the problem space that the scientists have, and map the two. And then it goes through this process, right? The mining of the technology, understanding what's going on in the lab is here. And then the mapping happens, and we're ideating. We're trying to think about what use cases this could serve if we do bring it in. Going into this innovation phase, where we're talking more to the scientist and trying to understand, does this map to you? And then we do an assessment phase. Part of this assessment is working with safety and security, working with cyber. We are a national laboratory, so we have some very stringent government standards that we have to adhere to. We have to protect our network. We have to protect the scientists themselves. And so part of that assessment is that. Then we do the acquisition. A lot of times we'll partner with the vendors as well so that we get these free ones to do this assessment. And then we pilot. And so then we have 1 or 2 of these things we deploy. We're doing usability, trying to understand, does it actually fit the need that we designed it for? Are there other needs based on what we see? We can remap it to other use cases. And that's part of that study and evaluation. So in terms of things that we are doing, investing in the next year, one is this reality capture. You want me to talk to this, or do you want to go? Yeah.
Let me go back a little bit. One of the other ways that we get some new ideas is we put out a proposal for ideas, basically. And one of the ones that was funded was actually through the IoT. That's another group here at the lab. They affiliated with us and started putting these sensors in the lab space. So that's another way we generate ideas that may be useful in the lab space, is we ask for people to have ideas. And so there's been a number of ones that some successful, some unsuccessful. The sensors is definitely one of those. Another one was Russ kind of talked about, where the robot can maybe have the instruments, what's the
Data?
word I'm looking for? The logbook or whatever, where it tells you how the instrument works. That can all be stored on the robot. And so you could ask a question of like, where do I put this doohickey on the instrument? And it would say on page 59, it says to put it here. And then it could show you that page. So it can be set up for whatever instruments you're going into. And that was another proposal that somebody put to Smart Labs that we could then use and try to put in the lab spaces. So that's another way that ideas are generated, and we try to apply those in the lab spaces.
Yeah, and a lot of times some of those ideas that come out is before the technology catches up. We had one 4 or 5 years ago that was using echoes to help ask scientific questions, right? And 4 or 5 years ago, an echo just didn't have a good language model on board to understand math, right? Or to understand like these scientific chemistry or biology type questions. And it just failed. It didn't know, it would always ask, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? You could never make it work. Now, because of where generative AI has gone and these language models, you can actually ask these questions and it has answers, right? It could be lying, but it does have answers that it can actually articulate. All right, so the reality capture, this is early on trying to figure out how do we create a digital twin of an existing laboratory, right? And so we have camera systems that use LiDAR, use photogrammetry, and we can place that camera in the laboratory and it will take 3D pictures. You see this in real estate, right? It's exactly the same thing, but at this time now it's in scientific labs. And so that's what that is in the top right corner. That is a map, a 3D map, 3D image of a laboratory. When it gets scanned, then you can put points of interest. So a point of interest is it's a rectangle or a pixel in that map. And that point of interest can be anything from a sensor to a camera, to data, to asset system, to documentation that live in a system called Lab Assist, which is like modus operandi or risk calculations, right? And so you can literally have spatial awareness of a laboratory and have all the data in it, right? The reason why that's important in terms of a digital twin is you can get a live capture of how the experiment is running spatially, as opposed to looking at a table in real time. That will lead to augmented reality and virtual reality, right? If I can show where it exists spatially, I can put points of interest when I'm just walking the space. And rather than having to log into a computer when I'm in a lab, I can see it streaming onto my headset, right? I can see the data coming off of that instrument. I can see the data, the asset number, who's using it, what's using it now, all of that in the headset. So that goes into the spatial computing piece, which is why reality capture. And so we have the latest Apple Vision Pro. We also have just the headset looks like goggles. We also have the Magic Leap 2. And so this is also AR that you can stream live data to. So the sensor platform is critical right now when we're talking about automation of science. Mainly because you need to understand what's going on in a laboratory with the amount of data that's going on in there, right? So we have a variety of sensors. You want to talk about some of them?
There's all kinds of sensors that are produced by the company that we go with. It's Monet is the name of it. We went that way because, again, our collaboration with the Internet of Things Lab, these ones don't send data external to our environment. They can, but the way that we've set them up, we keep all of the data. It doesn't go external. So that's why we're using this particular brand. These are just some of the ones that we happen to bring with us. Again, there's a host of environmental, pretty much anything you can think of, there's a sensor that could sense that. So like this one, you can kind of see this orange rope. It's a liquid sensor. So you would put it in, say, like a tub or something like that, and it would tell you the water level based on where the liquid is on that rope, and be able to tell you, the depth of the water. This one is a power voltage cleanliness. So it tells you if there's how good the power is that's going into some kind of device. This one is, this is just an open door, open close kind of sensor, right? So you can put it on a door and tell if it's open or closed. This one is a gas pressure. So one of the common needs of researchers is nitrogen or other kinds of gas going in. And there's not always a good way of telling when that gas runs out from the bottle. And so sometimes they'll be doing a long-term research, maybe a week or something like that, that's dependent on the nitrogen to cool or whatever is going on, and the nitrogen runs out and the researcher doesn't know that. And so that particular experiment fails because the temperature increased or whatever because of a lack of the gas. This would tell them that and notify them. And then this one is probably your most common one. It just tells if there's motion in the room, tells if there's humidity, or it tells the humidity and it tells the temperature. And so all of these feed into a dashboard that the researcher or the facilities manager can look at and see that in real time. But more useful is it sends an alert to whoever you want to have a notification. So probably right now our most common usage is in refrigerators and freezers. We just have a sensor in there and have some thresholds so that if the temperature goes above or below a certain threshold, this person gets notified and they can go in and save their samples from the refrigerator going bad. That's the most common one. But there's other ones, water, right? So ones that we're putting into ESC right now, they've had a few leaks over there. So we're putting in water sensors in the places that have had leaks so that they can get notified about those leaks. One happened about a month ago on a Saturday, and there just happened to be somebody there. If there hadn't been, it would have been much worse. But this is going to stop that from not being noticed as quickly.
Yeah, so you can imagine as a scientist, right? One of the things you do a lot is just watch. You set an experiment to go, and then you have to just watch and make sure everything is doing what it's supposed to do, right? The liquid hasn't gone too low. This blinking light isn't doing something weird, right? And you could be doing so much more if we find ways to alert you when the things that you're watching, redundant stuff that you do, we can get rid of that, right? And so by having this data and these sensors, right, it's taking that burden off of you. And then what you can do with this is you can put thresholds, right? When the temperature reaches this high, tell me, right? When there's motion around this thing, tell me. When the temperature is this low or the gas pressure is at this level, notify me.
So he's talking about one of the burdens, right? So I should have mentioned that with the refrigerators, one of the buildings over in 331, they have about 40 refrigerators and freezers over in that area. And so they had people going around every 12 hours, checking each refrigerator and logging off that it's within the threshold. So every 12 hours, somebody was walking around to all the refrigerators, checking them. And now they don't have to do that because we just have a sensor in there that feeds that data out to them and notifies them if it goes badly.
Yeah. So where it's going is this data is all being pushed now into AWS, into a GovCloud instance, right? AWS then gives us dashboards. And so you can have a dashboard in front of you that tells you everything that's on that sensor. You have a temporal aspect to it, but you can also have a red-green in terms of within the safe parameters. Right? So anytime you can look at those and understand how your experiment is performing just on this metadata alone. Because we have this data, now we can actually collect it, aggregate it, and model it. Right? So AWS also offers prediction. And so if we get enough of this data, which we will here in this next couple months, we can then predict when an experiment might fail. All right, so it's not a set and forget anymore. It's actually a set, trend, and tell me this is trending in a way that we've seen failure before. You might want to course correct something, right? Or it can even predict when an instrument potentially fails, right? And so the goal here in the autonomous science bit is to run an experiment from beginning to end without actually hitting an instrument. Do it enough times, right? And you need this metadata, this data, in order to actually run that thing autonomously first in simulation. Then you can take that and then put it on the experiment and still have enough monitoring to be able to understand when failure could potentially happen.
One of the other success stories that we had that was honestly not on purpose, but we put out one of the sensors here that does temperature. We put it in one of the labs out in 331. That was one of our demo labs. And actually you'll see a video of that lab here in a little bit, or one that's adjacent to it. So we had the temperature sensor in there for months, just sitting there collecting data. We were getting ready to deploy in there. Actually, we just did that last week, but it was there since last September, I think. we'd put it in there because they said, hey, the room gets hot sometimes and facilities doesn't believe us. We're like, oh, we'll just throw a sensor in there and you can check it out. So over those months, they found that they were getting skewed data and they weren't sure why. So they ended up asking us if we could provide them the temperature data, which, yes, of course, it's your data, right? And so we gave it to them. And so they were able to correlate in there and see where there were spikes in the temperature of the room that was skewing the data. And so they were able to salvage that data and still be able to use it because they were able to say, like, this is why it was wrong because the temperature was this much higher in the room. And so they were able to salvage months of data because they happened to have a temperature sensor in there. But
Yeah.
just imagine if we did that on purpose.
So the other thing is, because this is your data, it becomes something you can publish with. Right? It's not just instrument anymore. It's all the other stuff that's external that you can also use as part of your publishing. The paperless one is an interesting one. So historically, you have lab notebooks, right? And they're written by hand and they sort of live by the instrument and you're just logging. That is data and information that is lost to the system. Right? And so because we have this other data and it's temporal, you have an iPad now, and that is now your notebook. And it's correlated to this data so that as you're logging, you can use that and correlate it to all the other sensors and cameras and everything else. And all it does is give you a bigger picture about what's going on. And the nice thing about doing that is it makes it searchable, right? So you can, when did this happen before? When did we log this before, right? As opposed to going leaf by leaf by leaf, you can actually search and use that as part of the data model. Is that thing moving that fast or am I? Okay. Mount Rainier's going off again. I don't know. All right, so we talked about this already. So we have a couple other things. So Rosie, we've named our robots clever, but Rosie, the robot, is one of those telepresence robots. We also have window to window. So this is called live window, where you can have, maybe you have two laboratories in two different locations, and it's just always on. You don't have to dial into Teams or turn into Zoom. It's basically a window between these spaces, like a portal. And you can just walk up and knock, and the video comes up on live, and you can see and talk to them. Right? It does shut the audio down. It does occasionally shut the video down just for cyber protection, but it's easy just to knock on it and start to work immediately.
So an easy example of that one is we're looking at over in ESC, there's a lab space that's going to be collaborating with Johns Hopkins University. So there's going to be a lot of collaboration there. They're actually looking at a high-speed 10 gig network to be able to transfer data back and forth. And so being able to have a video window in there to be able to talk to the collaborators in real time, you know, hey, how's it going? Whatever's going on seems like something that we want to look into.
Yeah, and we talked about the telepresence robot already. This is that assistant. Largely, we talked about that. This does have a sentry capability as well, so that it can wander a space and give you alerts based on what it observes. The Rocket Notebook is another digital notebook idea where instead of using an iPad, you still have that. There's something visceral about paper. I get it when I talk to scientists, like, I don't want to write on glass. It's a lab notebook. I want paper. And so this has the feeling of paper, but it's easy to capture it just by taking a picture of it, and then it becomes part of that digital record. It'll convert the written text to digital text, all of it. And so this is a way to still give the scientist the feeling of paper and still make it digital. This is the solid state that he was talking about, where you're able to swap hard drives. So data governance is becoming very critical as well. Typically what happens is your instrument and your instrument controllers, all that data is siloed in all these individual spaces, and you have to bring it together. But if we can have it start to collect in one place as it's coming off of the device, you can do real-time analytics and understand about multiple instruments, multiple sensors, all real-time, close to real-time. So thinking about how we centralize into a data store and have a data plan that sits on top of it is one of those things that is going to be critical in autonomous science. Sensor platform we talked about, you know, how that can be used in that autonomous science and creating models for simulation. This gives you an idea of what that sensor architecture looks like. This is AWS, and this is local. And so working across both, you'll see there's some really interesting architecture pieces that we can use. Binaco is the reality capture system, and they can also be put as part of that.
And as is the nature of these things, this is already wildly out of date, but the main idea is there. The stuff on the left is all local. If we were to lose our AWS connection, it would still function because the functional guts is on it here and a server stored here. But then all the data goes out into the right-hand side into the cloud and gives us some of the other features that we talked about. I don't know that we have a good slide, Russ, to talk about the cameras. So let me talk about those real quickly. So these are PoE, so power over Ethernet cameras that we put in. There's a lot of lab spaces. You'll walk in and a scientist will have a webcam connected to a laptop or something so that they can monitor something. All right, so this replaces those. These we can update the firmware. We can keep them secure, and you don't have to go through another laptop or desktop in order to access those things. You can actually use them in other ways, like you could put them in kiosks out in the hallway, those kinds of things. So we count those basically as another type of sensor device, and it'd just be a camera. So the uses for that, right? Just think maybe you're in a lab space where there's an analog dial that you need to be able to see for whatever reason, or a digital display that isn't hooked up to anything that you can access remotely. You could put a camera on it, or we put some out again out in 331 out there where they're worried about spillage because they're in a rad buffer zone and they don't want anything to spill and then carry things over into bad things, right? So we put water sensors on there. We also put cameras on there so that they could see if things are going badly just by checking real quickly. So cameras can enhance the lab space as well. So that's one of the other things that we're offering to the researchers.
Yeah. So this is that sensor dashboard I was talking about through AWS. You can see, the temporal data. You've got sort of gauges that you can look at. You can see sort of the red, yellow, greens. All right, this just gives you information at your fingertips instead of looking at a spreadsheet what this data looks like. The reality capture is that visual, the 3D model, the creating simulations. We should have just used this deck instead of talking before it. Oh, yeah.
This is a video out in 331. This is the demo lab I kind of talked about. This is going to loop. So if you miss something or have a question, it's just going to keep going at this point. But those little orange dots are what Russ had talked about. There's points of interest where you can put almost anything on them. So this is an early model of this, right? So you can see the dots on the floor. That's where the camera was, but that's where you can quote unquote walk through the lab space. This is just showing that one of those points of interest could be a camera. This one is, that one up there is a temperature. So if you wanted to go in and see the temperature, we're actually working on having that displayed in this image, but it takes a little more work. So at the state of where we're at on this right now is it's an orange dot and you click into it. But over time, we want that to actually say the real-time temperature as you're going into this image. So this is showing how you can go through the data and refine it however you want using Grafana, right? So the data is all there. You can say like, I want to know the temperature ranges in between this week or these hours or whatever time you want. And then we walk through the lab again. Again, the spots on the floor is where you can move to, and then the points of interest. So in this space, we only had a few things: temperatures. One of the ones in there is a vibration because we were trying to help the researchers be able to detect. They have a deionized water generator in there that is on the other side of that. So it has been left on sometimes, and that's a bad thing. If deionized water is going into the river, it can maybe have some effects. So they were trying to figure, how do they know if that's on? So we put a vibration sensor on there. If the vibration sensor is on for so long, someone gets notified and then they know that's on and producing deionized water that's going down the drain. So simple things like that can help in the lab space to make it more effective.
And you can look at this on a phone, a tablet, or your computer from any location and have that live data stream into it. Questions? Yeah. Oh, a mic, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I want you to talk about collaborations. How can academic institutions and labs collaborate with you and make use of some of your equipment?
Good question. So the question, in case it wasn't all heard, is how do we collaborate with other labs, smart labs specifically, I imagine. in academia. So we have a pretty strong relationship with Washington State University because it's right here. We have reached out to Oregon State. And so the goal for us is not to hold. I mean, the technologies we're showing you are available on the market today, right? What we're doing is experimenting on how to operationalize them. And so if your university or your lab wants to learn about how we did it, just reach out. We'll have conversations, right? And if you guys are doing something similar, I would love to hook the two of us up together and we can learn from you and you can learn from us. And so how we do it is literally just reach out to Tom Brunner or myself and you'll see our email addresses somewhere today. But yes, we're looking for collaboration. Yep.
Hi, my question is about like now you have multi-dimensional data of like different sensors and everything. Have you thought of making a virtual reality game, making out of it? I'm pretty sure a dork like me in my undergrad would love that for sure. Like,
Yeah.
have you thought of that?
So I think a short answer is yes, at least a little bit, because a couple of the easy applications for that digital image there is training, right? So I mean, imagine if you have the lab space, you have it all decked out appropriately, which that didn't really capture, but we're there, we can get there. You could do the training on how do you function in the lab, or think of like safety things. Are these caution signs being looked at when people walk in? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they need to be moved somewhere else where they're more effective. Things like that. So close to a game. I mean, maybe those could, and like the training could probably be made into a game. Click the 10 things in here that, you shouldn't touch without gloves on, or, whatever it might be.
In fact, we have instances of that. So we have a campaign here called We Are Safe. And so for We Are Safe, that laboratory, we literally put hazards in it, did a reality capture of it, and then the job of the person who's taking the training is to which ones are real hazards and which ones aren't. It's not gamifying in VR, AR like you're thinking about. I love it. Would love to, yeah, all I need is funding, right? And no one wants to fund a video game right now.
Hi, just as a follow-up to the first question, could you please give an estimate how this setup would cost if our lab wants to collaborate, or would it come without cost or something like that? Thanks.
How do you pay for it, I think was the question.
So the video window one that we talked about would be a pretty easy collaboration. That's, I mean, it's $2,000, $3,000 outside of the hardware. So like the collaboration that we talked about with like Johns Hopkins University, there's a bunch of other things in the background that cost more money, like getting the 10 gig network connection, all those other things. But just the collaboration tool, like, hey, having a window to both spaces, relatively cheap. The other things like, teaching some of our methodologies or the things that we're doing around network, those would just be meeting and conversations, and then we'd have to go from there.
Yeah, and we would work with our local STEM and outreach people to find that funding for our side. On your side, of course, you have to fund your own time. You'd have to fund device acquisition and that kind of stuff. But we would help you operationalize through our funding, I think. Yeah, good question.
Hello, so excellent presentation. I had a quick question though, because the last speaker spoke about the Moravec paradox, about how AI has trouble tackling easy tasks for humans. Specifically, he gave the example of taking supplies from shelves or a fridge, like let alone moving liquid from one to another, that it would have trouble doing things like that. But I feel that the iPad on wheels, as you described it, I think the telepresence and the sensors, I feel like combining just those two in itself would tackle a lot of those challenges. So is that type of an idea one of those things that are just unattainable right now, I guess?
It's totally attainable, right? So
yeah.
The paradox that I think he's talking about is that AI having the ability to visually recognize things is very difficult, right? But in the case of the supplies in the closet, right, you can have sensors, which is essentially a scale, that sit underneath those supplies, right? And so you could tell when the weight changes, right? And that then becomes a way to model the data, right? And so you can see over time, supplies are coming down, or supplies at 2 o'clock seem to be coming down, or the reverse of supplies are coming in, because sometimes the output of the research is literally supplies. And so you could train models based on the sensors and how it's being used, as opposed to trying to have AI visually understand what's going on in these cabinets. Right? But we are, so all the cameras we're talking about, we are looking at ways to have like AI looking at a single picture. Is that water? And you can classify water on the floor, right? You show that thing 20 times of water different places, right? It can literally say there's water on the floor. You may not have a sensor there, but now with AI, you can actually train it to recognize water, right? The hard part is events, which is the series of images, right? You can't say, oh, water is shooting out, right? And that event of rupture is not something AI can easily do yet, but the image of water is fairly easy to do in terms of like image recognition. Events in terms of temporal video, that is, I think it's very close. I just don't think it's quite there. And the really abstract ones of like the time is off on the wall, right? Or any of those kinds of things, it's a little harder. The more data, like I said at the beginning, the more data you give and the more data ability to capture, the easier it is for AI to understand the environment.
It's moving so fast too, right? I mean, you think 4 or 5 years ago, like Russ talked about, we couldn't do some of the things we could with the robot, and now we can with large language models.
What is the accuracy that you get, or the false positive or true positive that you get?
At first, you're going to get a ton of false, right? And then as you get like in the dashboard, you'll get a ton of false, and you as the scientist are part of the training, right? False, that's not true, not true, not true. And you're waiting by saying no, much like with music, you wait the response or you wait the alert, and over time it gets better. But early on, when we first put stuff in, unless we've done it before, it's going to be some false positives. Others?
I mean, this is more of a general question, but you mentioned how quickly things are being released, but how do you stay on top of like the newest innovation or the newest potential lab implementation tools?
All right. So you got to have no free time, right? I mean, at night I am constantly looking at my feeds, right? I've got RSS feeds everywhere. I'm looking at websites. I'm tracking some of the stuff that's coming out of academia. We love going to the one that's in Vegas. I forget what it's called, the big new hardware show that happens in Vegas every year in January. We love going there, or at least watching those things. But the only way to do it is just by constantly doing technology trend analysis, right? Some of the stuff's emerging. One of the things I'm working on right now is humanoid robots, right? Humanoid robots, the claims that they're saying is happening is not true, right? Watching some of the stuff that Tesla's doing or Boston Dynamics and how cool they are, you'll notice a lot of them are still tethered. Those little suckers fall down all the time, right? And so you could say that, oh, humanoids are possible today, right? And Elon claims, he's going to sell 55,000 next year. I would not put those in a laboratory right now, right? All that does is increase risk. But you sort of got to watch it, and then you start to see the trend of stability. It's not just about finding the current tech. It's like, when is it actually operational?
On that same topic, are there any good resources for like intro level tech for introducing to labs that like, or any sources that you would recommend for that?
Intro level. I might have to take that one offline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will add that our team in particular, as we see things, we throw it into a list, and then we have been trying where, every month or two, we just go through that list and say, like, are any of these worth investigating and seeing if we can get funding to try out? Are they worthwhile? Something we want to try? And we just go through those ideas and kind of discount them or raise them up to a level where we want to try and look at them. Yeah, literally, it's you find something, you put it in a list. You find something, you put it in a list. And then monthly, we have a quad chart that we map it to, right? And, is it practical? Is there use cases that we could use in the laboratory? Is cybersecurity going to yell at us, right? I mean, the humanoid robots, 70% are coming out of China. There's no way we're going to be able to do a Chinese robot in a national lab, right? And then the other angle was cost. Can we find cost to actually invest in it, right? And so then we map it on those. That assessment then becomes something of if it hits all four, we go to the next level.
I have
Yep.
a question. So You are working on sensors. That is really great. But one of my question is about, are you starting working on detecting shooters before entering or doing, a disaster inside of a building or a school? So because that is, I think, a big deal
Yeah.
in this country. So I don't know if you already started working on that.
The Smart Labs team has not. DHS is very actively looking at those types of things. And so there's a program in DHS called Sentry. And they're looking at these types of sensors. They're looking at cameras. They're doing all kinds of things. But the Smart Labs itself, we're mainly focused in the scientific lab right now. Sponsors, for sure, are looking into it.
Yeah, so my question is regarding the iPad on wheels as well.
Yeah.
Like, how close or far do you think it is from acting as a lab manager, like right from inventory management to training, say someone like me who is not that comfortable in wet lab protocols? So how close or far away do you think is this machine from that? And secondly, with all these sensors being integrated in labs, do you think at some point of time they would help us in setting up good lab practices or best practices for a particular experiment protocol that would help in reducing experiment failures, or cutting down that time on iterations that we end up performing a lot of times?
Yeah. Let me hit the last question first. That is the sole purpose of our autonomous science investment, and not the sole purpose. It's one of the main drivers of our foundations of autonomy and our autonomous science, is to collect the data off these sensors so that you can simulate experiments, right? And so if you can have real data to create models, and then you can run an experiment in simulation or virtually 100 times, right? You can actually see potential failures, but you can also see paths to that experiment to get to an outcome of interest, right? You're not trying to get to the positive outcome, because that wouldn't be the right way to do science, but you can actually get to an outcome. Whereas now, if you run an experiment, especially if it's overnight, you're hoping that it didn't fail overnight, right? So that's one of the reasons why autonomous science is really important. How close we are, I don't know. In terms of this robot being used in our environment now, I mean, this is available on the market today. Like all the stuff we're talking about, this is available, right? It already has the ability to do language models. All it's going to take is development time to actually do it and hook it up to those systems. For us, we're hoping over the next year or two to actually have it inside a laboratory in that assistant piece. What's happening right now is some of the cyber issues are holding us up. Right, this is streaming data in places we don't want it to, and so we're trying to figure out how to work with this provider to cut that down so that we can bring it into those laboratories. Right now, it needs to be in a public space, not within something that needs to be protected. So I think personally, and this is Russ's opinion, right? This is not far off. This is probably within the next 5 years, you will see digital assistants like this inside their laboratories, inside your schools, inside buildings in general.
Yeah, so you said something similar, but I had the question regarding cybersecurity. Since you go into automation and you increase more and more IoT device, the vulnerabilities, like, they add up. So have you ever run into the problem of like some denial service attack or any like falsifying packets, or like how do you think like this automation, like this field of cybersecurity in automation, like will we have more attacks, or like are we doing good on defending those? Like, what do you think? Have you run into such problems before?
So this is where I wish Penny McKenzie was in the room. So Penny McKenzie is our cyber IoT, and where we got these sensors, right? So she runs our IoT laboratory, and her job in cyber is to buy IoT devices and then through her digital tools understand where that data is going and what the data is, right? And so through her, we're able to understand, like, our refrigerator is constantly streaming data to places that you didn't know was going to go, right? The Roomba device is actually gathering GPS material information inside your home to places you don't want to know, right? And so as you think about adding more and more of these IoT systems into your laboratory, if you don't understand the risks, you are increasing the vulnerability. Now, have we seen an attack personally? Right? Luckily, because we've been working with Penny, the things that we're putting in our laboratories are pretty safe, right? We're not adding them to our labs if they're going outside. And so she does an assessment first before we put it. And everything we own, the data we own, it stays local. So that's a big piece is understanding where these vulnerabilities are.
That part isn't true for the robots, so unfortunately.
Which is
So
why-
the sensors and the stuff going into AWS, that's all